The courtroom smelled like old wood and cold coffee, and my stepmother Vivian wore the kind of smile that told everyone she had already won before the hearing even began. "This girl thinks she's entitled to something," she said to her lawyer. Loud enough for the whole gallery to hear, loud enough for me to feel it land exactly where she wanted it to. She barely visited her father the last few years. I was the one who was there. I was the one who mattered. A few heads turned my way, some with pity, some with the quiet judgment of people who only know half a story and are content to leave it that way. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, wearing my mother's old watch, the one thing of hers I still carried, and I let Vivian talk. I had learned a long time ago that people who need the audience to feel powerful usually don't last long once the audience stops clapping. If you've ever watched someone rewrite the truth in front of a room full of strangers, twisting your silence into proof of your guilt, you already know how heavy that kind of unfairness sits in your chest, and I promise you, what happens in the next few minutes of this hearing is going to make you want to stand up and cheer. Vivian had married my father for years after my mother passed, and for a while, I had genuinely hoped she might be good for him. It might fill some of the quiet that had settled into our house. But hope has a way of curdling when you watch someone slowly reshape a person you love, redirecting his calls, editing his guest lists, mentioning at every dinner how tired he seemed whenever I visited, until visits became harder to schedule, then rarer, then nearly impossible without an argument attached. My father, in his final 2 years, became someone I only saw through carefully managed windows of time, always supervised, always brief. I didn't fight it as hard as I should have, because I believed, foolishly, that time would eventually work itself out. It didn't. He passed quietly one October morning, and Vivian filed to contest his estate within a month, insisting the will favoring me had been signed under manipulation, insisting I had abandoned him, insisting the courts would surely see things her way. The judge, a measured man named Judge Alvarez, called the hearing to order and asked Vivian's attorney to proceed. He painted a picture of a distant, uninterested daughter, an absent stepchild who reappeared only once money became relevant. Vivian nodded along with every sentence, occasionally glancing at me like she was watching a play reach its satisfying conclusion. When it was my attorney's turn, she didn't argue with the narrative directly. She simply said, "Your Honor, before we continue, I'd like to introduce documentation regarding the trust structure established 11 years ago, prior to Mrs. Whitmore's marriage into the family." Vivian's smile faltered slightly, the way ice does right before it cracks. Not my father, it turned out, had set up an irrevocable trust years before he ever met Vivian, naming me as sole trustee over the estate's core holdings, including the house, the investment accounts, and controlling interest in the family business Vivian had spent 4 years quietly trying to gain access to through him. The will she was contesting wasn't the primary document at all. It was a secondary supplementary arrangement covering personal items and small bequests, several of which, my attorney noted calmly, had actually been left to Vivian herself, generously, despite everything. The larger estate, the one Vivian believed she was fighting for, had never been hers to contest in the first place, because it had never belonged to my father alone to give away. It had already been placed in my hands, quietly years earlier, back when he still trusted me completely and had no idea how much distance would eventually grow between us. Vivian's attorney asked for a recess. In the hallway outside, she approached me for the first time without an audience present, her voice smaller than I had ever heard it. "You never said anything," she said. "All these years you never once mentioned you controlled the trust." I looked at her and answered honestly, "Because it was never about control. Vivian, I would have given you access to whatever you needed if you had ever once let me back into his life instead of pushing me out of it. I didn't fight you because I wanted power. I stayed quiet because I still loved him. And I didn't want his last years to be full of conflict because of me." She didn't apologize that day. Not fully, though something in her face shifted. The particular collapse of someone realizing the story they told themselves for years was never entirely true. In the months that followed, the case settled quietly, generously, on my terms rather than the court's, because I chose to honor the small bequests my father had left her regardless of what she had tried to take. I didn't do it for her. I did it because my father raised me to be someone who didn't need to win in order to be right, and because grace, given freely, costs less in the long run than bitterness ever will. If someone in your life has ever tried to rewrite your story to make themselves the hero of it, remember that the truth doesn't need your permission to eventually come forward. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Tell us in the comments what part stayed with you, and stay close, because there are so many more quiet truths still waiting for their moment to rise.